Hey guys, welcome to Chapter 7, and this section is going to be on testing or test-driven development in Rails. And testing is something that's not needed. As you already know, we built an entire app without doing any tests. But for more intricate, complicated apps that have lots of models and controllers, you really should do some testing. In this section, or in this series rather, I'm not going to go deep into test-driven development because it can get really complicated. There's multiple types of frameworks you can use, RSpec, and there's some other ones. We're just going to do a standard unit test that we're able to do with just Rails. So why would we write tests? We would write tests because, for one thing, they're very easy to, well, some tests, unit tests are pretty easy to write. And what it does is it produces skeletons of test code that you can't see. It's in the background. And it's creating these skeletons while you're creating models and controllers. So you don't have to set up testing before you build an app. It actually runs alongside as you're building your app. It creates certain directories and certain files in the test directory that you can later on use. By simply running your Rails tests, you can ensure that your code runs with the desired functionality, and that's even after editing and refactoring your code. Rails tests can also stimulate browser requests without you having to go and use a browser. So you can test if certain pages are loading, or if certain forms can be filled out by users. Different things that you would normally use the browser for, you don't have to with TDD, or test-driven development. Alright, so test environment and database. As you probably know, if you've been going along with this series, Rails has three environments: development, test, and production. So far, we have been dealing with the development environment. We have the production environment on Heroku, and we haven't created a separate test environment or a separate test database yet, but we will be doing that in the coming tutorial, or the coming section after this. When you're using Heroku, they tell you to use one database for development, test, and production, but that's only the remote app on Heroku. Locally, you can have multiple databases for development, test, and production. So the test folder. All Rails installations come with a folder called test, and within that there's 5 more folders, which are fixtures, unit, functional, performance, integration, and then there's a test helper document or file. And I'll just go through these real quick. Fixtures is basically organization of your tests. It keeps them all in order. And just gives structure to all your tests. Unit is for testing models, and that's what we'll be getting into in the programming section of this chapter, or this section. Functional is where your controller tests are located. Performance for tests for speed and memory and all that good stuff. Site performance. Integration is for, I guess it's for controllers that interact with each other, I guess. And then the test helper, it's the default configuration file, and it's included in all test files. You'll see this at the top, require test helper. Okay, so that's that. So fixtures, as I said, they allow us to set up organization for our tests. And we can set up customizations as well. And fixtures run on the YAML format, and that gives us a human readable file to work with. Each fixture will have a title along with some key value pairs. So we have the post 1 fixture, and it has the name key and the value and the created author. This is obviously just a sample. This could be anything. This could be a user. Could be anything at all. So that's just a sample. You can also use embedded Ruby in YAML files. So you can use the tags, the % tags, if you want to put some dynamic content in there. And you can actually access fixtures in other files. I didn't put that on here, but you can access them like this. If we were in the post fixture and you wanted to access this fixture, the post 1, you just have that. You'd put that, and you can also do certain fields as well. You could do this post1.name, and that would give you this here, a sample post. So that's fixtures. And generating resources. When you generate controllers, models, or scaffolds, Rails will create these files for you, and no matter what, for the stuff we've already created, we already have files for. We have the unit tests, we have fixtures for the posts, and you guys know we have models. Unit tests deal with models, and functional tests deal with controllers. And this is just a scaffold command. We've used this before, and we're actually going to use this again in the second part of this section. Test stubs. The file you see here, sorry about that, the posttest.rb, it's in the test unit folder. These are called test stubs, and this is where we define our tests. And this is what's there by default. If we go now and we open our post-test RB file, this is what we'll see. And it's just, it requires the test helper. As I said, all unit tests will have this at the top. And then we have the class, which extends the active support test case class. And in here, they just have this just sample test here called the truth. You would define test, and you could use a human readable name like this, but in reality, it's when Rails reads this, it's reading it as like this: test the truth, the truth. So the machine readable way of doing it has the underscores instead of spaces, but you can use this format if you want to put quotes around it, and you can use a human readable form. And then assert true is just it's checking if the test is true or false. There's a lot of different assert statements we could do. We could do assert something like this: assert post is valid. So we do stuff like this. So we'd have, actually I can show you in the next slide or a couple slides down. We're actually going to do a sample test. This is a little tough to understand. The test names, like I just explained, they have names like this: test valid password, or like this, which is camel case. But in the test stubs, we usually use more readable names, something like this, with capital letters and spaces and just human readable stuff. So this here, test the truth in quotes, is the same as this. This is how Rails reads it. This is how we like to read it or write it. And assert true, it's an assertion, which is code that evaluates an object for expected results. Assertions can check things like if one value is equal to another value, or if something's nil, or if a line of code throws an exception or not, if a user's password is greater than 6 characters, anything like that, any kind of evaluation. And all tests have to have at least one assertion, even if it's just assert true, like the sample test above. So preparing your app for testing, we want to migrate the database. We want to make sure that it's up to date. and we actually want to use our test database. So we would go into, in the next video, what we're going to do is go into our database configuration file, and we're going to actually create another database for testing, and we can do that easily through pgadmin. You can use the command line as well, and if you want to migrate the test database, we could make sure that it's choosing the test database with this command here, just telling it that the environment we want is test as opposed to development. And then we want to recreate the database from the current scheme. So this rake command here would take what we have in our development database and load it into our test database, because we don't want to mess with the development or the production database when testing. And running tests, you run them in the command line with something like this. This would run the post unit test for the model. To run a certain test, you could put the name on the end of it, like the test the truth. This actually would run all tests in this folder, or in this, in this file. If you want to single one out, you could use this format. And your results will look like this. If your test fails, it'll say 1 failure, or however many failures. And if you have some kind of error in your syntax, you'll get an error. But just because you get an error doesn't mean that the test is failing. It's usually a syntax error or something like that. And a simple sample test would be, if we want to test if the post has a title, so we can actually go and create a new post with this line here. And you'll see here we have some title, so we use the assertion to see if the post is valid, and it's gonna pass no matter what, unless you have this inside your post model. You want the title to validate it's required, so the presence is true, so it's required. So if you have this in your post model and you go and write this test, it'll fail because it's not there, the title is not there. If you put it back, if you put something in there, then it's going to pass. And that's just a very simple test. I'm not going to get into highly advanced testing or any other frameworks. It's not really needed for what we did or what we're doing here. So that's it. So let's move on to the programming section of this, the programming video of this section, and we'll start learning how to test.